Fact. At your most important moment, at the biggest moment of crisis that you have in your life, if your decision making is not rooted in principles, that decision will fail. Fact. Guaranteed. We started talking about choices and decisions last week. And the primary tool that we have for making decisions is the soul and the spirit that inhabits our soul that God has placed within us. Our heart is the wellspring of all choices and decisions. If our heart is wrong in any way, the decisions and choices that flow out of that heart will be equally wrong. They will be equal to the task of our dark heart. If our heart is right with God, then we have a leg up on the majority of people who have existed throughout history, in that our heart is right with God, and the Holy Spirit exercises some influence within each one of us. And now, as we talked about the heart, we divided those kinds of decisions that are automatic within us, those things that keep our heart breathing and our heart beating and our lungs breathing. Those kinds of things are automatic and they happen without us thinking. But then we talked about a number of other kinds of choices that we say are amoral. What we wear and what we eat and those kinds of things. And we often think that there is no moral component to those, that the condition of our heart does not affect what we wear. The condition of our heart doesn't affect what we choose to eat. Now we think that, but as we begin to steer our talk into the idea of principles, I want to challenge that. I personally have an enormous challenge every day when I drive home from this place. And that is that I drive past Burger King, Jack in the Box, Taco Bell, McDonald's, Panda Express. I can't even keep up with them all now, okay? And I will admit my weakness and fondness for the Golden Arches, okay? I can pick up that grease wafting towards my truck just as soon as I come over there. And I'll tell you, there are days where it's easy to drive past. I can make that choice pretty easy. But there are other times, and I'll tell you the hardest time is when we do things here in the evening, which I think is like almost every night sometimes. You do things, and you're going home, and you're a little bit hungry, and that smell hits you. Okay, now if I had to make that choice just based upon my hunger, or the ease with which I could pull into the drive-thru, satisfy my hunger, go home, or just the fact that I wanted to nosh on a Big Mac, whatever it was, if I made that in that state, my hunger, my tiredness, my whatever it is, if I made it rooted in that, then I would be like this big, okay? Because I would stop every time. Because in my mind, I would be able to justify it. I'm hungry. There's a source of food. It's already prepared. Bam, I could have it eaten before I get home. I could be wiping the fries off my face by the time I pull in the driveway. But if I make that choice rooted in principle, it then becomes no choice at all. So I have a principle that I want to be reasonably healthy, that I want to maintain a reasonable weight, that I don't want to consume all the calories that come in that bag and in that ginormous Coke that comes with it. My principle says that my health and such comes first. And so when I drive by, no matter how hungry I might be, no matter how good it smells, no matter how tired I may be, I don't even have to think about it. I can just drive past, because the principle that I have established in my life is that's a once in a while thing. This is my principle of health comes first. So we need this principle on top of the goodness in our heart. I'll give you another example that you can all reference, since maybe McDonald's doesn't affect you the same way. We all drove here this morning, except maybe Jan. Maybe Jan walked over this morning, but all the rest of us drove here. Now, as you were driving here, I'm willing to bet that you were really not thinking about the mechanics of what you were doing. You stopped at the stop signs. You stayed reasonably close to the speed limit. You yielded the right of way. You did all these things automatically. The reason that you did these things automatically is that you have a principle in your life. That is, I want to make it safely to my destination, and I would like other people to make that safely to their destination as well. So your principle is the good of all of us. That's how stop signs work, isn't it? There is nothing physically that stops you from going through. You stop at the stop sign and the red lights and all these other things because you don't want to get hit by the car that might be coming in the cross traffic. And they agree. You have a little social contract between you and them. You see the red sign, I see the red sign. We'll agree that we're going to stop. So you don't think about it. But now think about this. If you didn't have that principle moving and working in your life, every time you came up to the red light or the stop sign, you'd have to decide whether or not you were going to stop. Now, most days you probably just, okay, I'll stop. Nothing better to do. But what about those times when you're in a hurry? What if you were from California and you would regularly just roll through stop signs? You know, you don't want to be in that state where you have to think about it. You don't want to be cruising along and all of a sudden you're passing everybody because you hadn't decided whether or not today was the day you were going to obey the speed limit. You don't want to not yield the right of way just because today I decided I'm the king of the road and so therefore everybody yield to me. Principle says no. My principle is I'm going to obey the law. I'm going to make sure I get safely there. I make sure everybody else gets as much as I can. Okay? So principle says that. If you get into a state where you have to make decisions at a crisis moment, the way that we are wired is that you'll fail. You will fail in the sense that you will begin to do what human beings do, and that is you begin to justify away your decision. So go back to the stop sign. You're in a hurry. Your hair is on fire, and you are in a hurry to get to the hospital. So as you come up to that stop sign and you see that there's nobody there and there's no sheriff anywhere, you're going to justify just blowing right through that stop sign. You're going to say, well, it's good for me. It's good for me. My hair's on fire. I need to get to the hospital, and blow through there. But what about the other decisions that you make? If you have to come to a point in your life where you are at a crisis moment, that is you are at a fork in the road, and you can go this way and you can go this way. And when you come up to that fork, and everything in your life will hinge upon this decision. If I make this choice, bad things could potentially happen. If I make this choice, good things will happen. If you come up to that fork in the road and you have to stand there and rub your chin and decide at that moment, you will fail. 9 times out of 10. You will fail because that fallenness in you, and I know I keep saying you, but me too, that fallenness in us will cause us to immediately begin to justify why this is okay. So you come up to that fork in the road, let's say it's the stop sign. So, well, nobody's around, you go through it until somebody is around. Or you come up to the stop sign, the fork in the road, and you say, well, I got a bigger car than they do, so you go through. Justify, until you don't, until you fail and run into somebody. If we don't operate out of principle, our decisions, the choices that you and I make, will fail almost every single time. So, principle number 1 was we need to get our heart right. That is, our heart needs to be committed to God, and therefore the Spirit takes up dwelling within us. So the Spirit is in control of our heart. And we need to be consistently and constantly throughout our entire life yielding to that Spirit. So that the Spirit says, hey, you are here at a crossroads. You know the right thing to do. You know exactly the right thing to do. Do it. We read throughout the Bible all kinds of stories of people who found themselves at that crossroad. We're all familiar with the story of Rahab. Rahab had a crisis moment in her life, and that is the spies show up at her door, and she has to make a choice. She has to make a decision about what to do with them. Shall I hide them? Shall I slam my door? Okay? If she was not operating out of the principle of belief in the God of Israel, that she had not been exposed to that she had not understood that the reality of this God of Israel was something that she had come to know and that she had come to understand, at that moment, she may have decided to simply slam the door on the spies. Said, you're on your own. Go get away from my household. I got enough problems. But instead, her principle said, the God of Israel has done what Israel says he has done. Their history has established that this God, this Yahweh, is who he says he is. So, on principle, she said, despite the enormous risk to health and life and everything that she held, she said, I'm going to take them in. I'm not only going to take them in, I'm going to hide them. And I'm going to stand up when the people that are searching for them come looking for them. I'm going to stand up against this, even if it costs me my life. Even if everything that I have disappears tomorrow, the right thing to do, based upon what I know about the God of Israel, is to shield these men. So we have Rahab. There's an example of making a choice. Another person that we see throughout the scriptures making choices is King David. Now, King David is a little more up and down. David faces a number of crisis moments in his life. That is where he stands at this fork in the road and he can make this choice or he can make that choice. Now, the principle that David operates from in almost every case is that I will honor God. I will honor God. I will uphold his glory. He is God. I am his servant. Even though he has made me the king, I am God's servant. And so almost every decision where David is standing at that fork in the road, every decision reflects the principle of him upholding God in life. Except one. And if you watch this decision that David makes, you'll see that he is consciously, at each juncture, making decisions that bring trouble into his life and really everybody else's life. One year, David has stayed home in the spring when the kings go to war. David has elected to stay back. Bad choice number one. He knows that he is the leader of Israel, and as the king of Israel, As God's anointed person, his responsibility is to lead Israel off to do God's work. And he doesn't. He says, I'm going to stay back. I'll stay home. Bad choice number one. His principle has been overrun or overridden by his choices. David has fallen backwards. He then decides to take a stroll on the top of his palace. And from there, he looks down at the young woman Bathsheba across the way, bathing. Fork in the road. David, should you even be peering over the edge of your palace? Or should you have turned away immediately and gone back inside? Bad choice number two. I'm the king. I'm God's anointed guy, so whatever I do is pretty much okay. So he indulges himself by peering over the side, and then indulges himself by sending a servant to go find out who she is, then indulges himself by calling for her to come to see him, and you know the rest of the story. David is a man of principle, 9 times out of 10. But this one time when he refuses to acknowledge his highest principle, which is that he is God's anointed man, and as the king, as the representative of all Israel, he has a responsibility to make every choice and every decision on that principle. But when he comes to that crossroads, he sets that principle aside. And look at all the pain that's caused by that. People that are not David are now affected by his choice. A child dies because of David's choice. Well, David writes a number of the Psalms. And Psalm number 1, I bet most of you know this by heart, but let me read it to you. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Psalm 1 is kind of misunderstood by us as a separate poem, as like the first psalm. But what Psalm 1 actually is a statement of every other psalm. Every other psalm, the other 149 psalms, support what Psalm 1 says. Every other psalm points back to this as the introduction to the entire Psalter. And so what David is saying here is that there are principles at play. There are principles by which you must live. There are principles by which you must honor God. And when you choose contrary to those principles, or when you lack those principles in general, you will fail. You will be like the chaff that is blown away by the wind. You will have nothing that anchors you to the ground. Look at the order in which he says these things. Walk and stand and sit. This is not an accidental ordering here. You think about sin. You think about bad choices or choices that don't honor Jesus. And isn't that the way they always go? We toy with the idea. Like I always remember this one kid in Dr. Klein's class, he described it this way. He says, before we act on sin, we fantasize about it first. We play it over in our mind. How good it's going to be. How neat it's going to feel to get away with whatever it is. We toy with it. Our principle says, first and foremost, we honor our Lord Jesus. So right there's your first stop. There's your first barrier. If your principle, first and foremost, is that you honor Jesus, you cut that off right away. You don't sit there and roll it over in your mind. Well, could I get away with this? I might. Be fun if I got away with this. Be fun if I drove too fast. Whatever it is, we play with it in our mind. But then we get closer to it, don't we? We stand by it. We walk ourselves right up to that precipice and we go, well, nobody's looking. I bet I could get away with this. Nobody will ever find out. It won't affect anybody. It won't hurt anybody. It's only going to affect me. So if I sin, if I decide to do whatever this sin is, it's not going to hurt anybody else. So what's the big deal? So you've processed it. Your principle of honoring Jesus has not stopped you from considering it. So just like David, when he peered over the edge, he could have said, not for me, and walked back. But he didn't, did he? He walked up to the edge and he took a good long stare. And as he stood there staring, his principle of honoring God, first and foremost, vamoose, gone. I'm honoring David. Well, nobody's going to find out. I'm the king. I can look over my palace wall. But then he makes the choice, doesn't he? He thought about it. He acted on it. And then he made it his own. He took up residence in that sin. Hey, go find out who that lady is. Well, once you find out who she is, bring her here. His principle, 9 times out of 10, would have made David do the right thing. But this one time, he decided that principles are for little people. They're for everybody else. I'm going to honor David. I'm going to act upon what David wants. I'm going to do what David feels like doing. And then the consequences that roll out from that choice are just incredible. How many lives are lost just in that story? How much pain and damage is caused just by that? Had David stopped and honored the principle that he said he lived by, that he is God's anointed servant and that God's glory is his utmost concern, had David just stopped even once and said, no, I'm not doing this, I'm not looking, I'm not acting, I'm not going to fantasize about it, wrong, then who knows? Who knows what the history of Israel would have been after that? But he came up to that fork in the road, and the principle that he said he lived by maybe wasn't as firm as he thought it was. And so he makes this alternate decision. He writes this, and he says, these are the principles. If you are a man or a woman of honor, if you are a man or a woman of God, you will not play this game of edging closer to sin. You will not toy with something and then test it and then actually taste it to see if you can get away. You won't go anywhere near it. You want to be like this tree planted by streams of water. You want to have a taproot that goes down so deep that no matter what your state, no matter how hungry you are driving past McDonald's or how tempting it is to run the red light and speed on your way, no matter what, your taproot will go so deep, no matter what temptation surrounds you, that taproot goes down and just connects right up here to that spirit within you that says, you're not that person. You are not the person that stops and stuffs your face full of that. You are not the person who runs the stop sign. You are not that person. you're a child of God, a son or a daughter of God. That's the principle upon which you act. That's the principle on which you live and you conduct yourself. He says that is what a man of honor does. That is a life that prospers. But without principles, if every time you had to make a choice, you had to sit there and evaluate whether you could get away with it, evaluate whether or not anybody else is going to get hurt, evaluate whether or not somebody's going to find out what you're doing, if you do that every time, you're going to choose the wrong fork. Because in your mind, you will convince yourself that you can get away with it. Really, we're all little Davids. You think, well, it's not that bad. I'm just going to dip my toe in it, and then I'll pull it back real quick. Well, baloney. Once you've dipped your toe in it, your whole foot's going to go in it, and pretty soon both your legs are in it, and then you're up to here in it. Okay? It happens that fast. But if you operate from principle, if you say, look, I just am never going to toy with that. I'm just never going to allow that to be a part of who I am. If my principle is that I honor Jesus and I want to reflect the influence of Jesus in my life and on my choices, well then when you come up to this fork in the road, you will automatically go the right way. You won't have to think about it. You won't have to evaluate whether or not you're going to get caught. You won't have to think about who's going to get injured because nobody's going to get injured. You're going to be that man who prospers. And the people around you are going to notice that you are that man of honor who prospers, or that woman of honor who prospers. Because consistently, your choices, your decisions lead you on a path that honors Jesus. Remember the little armbands we were talking about last week? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? I'm pretty sure Jesus didn't have to think about the choices that he made. Now, he had an up on us, but he gave us his Spirit. And so if we rely on that Spirit, and if we allow that Spirit to really conform our character to that of Christ, if we are consistently involved in a discipleship that increasingly makes us more Christ-like, well, then our decisions and our choices will follow. We will just naturally choose the right path because it's who we are. We can look at David and say, that's who he was, except for this, except for that. When you look at the Old Testament, and there's a reason that I've pulled people out of the Old Testament, the New Testament has an equal number of failures. But in the Old Testament, you were responsible for evaluating your choices based upon the rules. You had to look at the rules and say, well, okay, so it's Sunday, it's Sabbath day. My donkey can only go 50 feet, so how can I get my donkey 49 3/4 of a foot before... If you're making that decision, that last quarter foot ain't going to bother you a bit. Your donkey go 50, 51, 100 feet, because you can justify it. Anytime we get presented with rules, I mean, look what happens with Israel and the commandments that God gives them. He said, I'm going to make it so easy for you. Here it is. 10 principles of life. Honor God, honor your neighbors. Just do that and everything's going to be wonderful. And not 5 minutes later, they're going, well, it says don't murder, but I accidentally ran this person over. So as soon as we get rules, the way that we are wired is we begin to find ways around the rules. How can I get away with that? They totally missed the principles that were involved in those commandments. But Jesus distills it down, doesn't he? He says, forget the rules. The rules still stand, but I'm going to make it so simple for you. I'm going to make it so simple for you, my people. I'm going to give you my Spirit, number one. So my Spirit's going to take up dwelling in you. So that root in you is connected to me. And here's the rules. Love God, love your neighbor in the same way. Done. If we operate out of that, there is no more, well, who's my neighbor? Technically, is the guy across the street my neighbor? No, you don't have to think about it. You operate out of what your Lord says. What would Jesus do? He would love God and he would love all your neighbors. Every single one of your neighbors, Jesus would love. I promise you that to be true. So, if you operate out of the principles that I honor Jesus above all other things, it's simple as can be. Honor God, love my neighbors. See how easy that is? When you come up to that fork in the road, you do not ever want to find yourself going, is she my neighbor? Technically, no. She lives in Hayburn, so I guess it's not. If you do that, you've already failed because you've already taken the first step over here. But if you come up to that fork in the road and you go, yep, that's my neighbor, so she, so are they. Done. It's over, and you will treat them according to what God has said. See, this was so easy. I didn't even need to tell you this stuff, huh? Except I do, because so many times we find ourselves falling back to the choice-making thing. Listen, as disciples of Jesus Christ, our role, our task is to demonstrate a different way of life. Our role, the reason that Jesus has left us here, the reason that he has formed us together as his church, as his people, is so that we will show the world a different way of life. That we will demonstrate in each of our individual lives the advantage of having that root tapped into the source of living water. That we act differently from the rest of the world. That is our role as his people. That is why we are here as a church, so that we can show the advantages of living differently from what we see in David here. Now, last week, we talked about having your heart right, and I said, if you don't believe me, and I'm sure you did, but if you didn't believe me, test God. Test him. And that didn't come from me, that came from the Scriptures. The Scriptures said, test me. Try me. So if you have tested God and you have seen that what the Bible promises about him and about having your heart right in him, if you saw that that was true, then the next step for us, for those of us that are convinced that having a right heart is a necessity, well, the next thing we do is establish what our principles are. Establish what your principles and my principles are going to be in life. It's that simple. Establish who we are. And why is this important? It's important so that we don't find ourselves at that fork in the road evaluating what we can get away with. Evaluating who's going to find out if we do these things. Evaluating any of these things. We want to find ourselves at that fork in the road and naturally make the right choice. Because our first principle is we honor our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's it. That's what we do. So everything that I think, do, say, feel, all those things operate out of that principle. Jesus is my Savior and my Lord, and so I operate under that. So there is nothing to evaluate. Can I get away with it? It doesn't matter if you can get away with it. Will anybody find out? Doesn't matter. Is anybody else going to get hurt? Doesn't matter. None of these things matter. The only thing that matters is, will the choice that I make bring honor to Jesus Christ? Will somebody who looks at my life and sees the series of choices and decisions that I make, will they look at that and see Jesus being honored? And that's it. No rules. No actions, no nothing. Do the decisions and choices that you make in your life demonstrate your highest principle, and that is you honor Jesus Christ above everything else. If it does, you will consistently walk down the right path. You will never find yourself with sinners or mockers. You will never find yourself there because everything you do flows out of that. Now the challenge here is getting to that point, to where you operate from your principles. Let's say your principle is you're never going to lie to anybody. Anybody want to join me in this? Okay. You're never going to lie to anybody for any reason. Okay? Think about this. You're at that fork in the road, and if I tell a lie, it's going to ease some pain that might come into my life. But if I don't tell a lie, I will honor who I say I am. Yeah, I take responsibility for whatever I was just about to lie about. Or, yeah, this is the fact, whatever it is. If you come here and you start evaluating and you start thinking about the pain that's going to come your way, you're going to start thinking about who's going to be upset with you when they find out you lied. If you have to do all those things, you're not operating out of principle. So step one is to step back here. Start today. I'll give you the whole afternoon off, okay? You may go home and you may sit down and quietly say, what are the principles by which I live my life? What are the principles by which I live my life? I will honor Jesus Christ in my decisions. I will make sure that my life reflects the influence that he has on me. Write that down. I won't lie. I will only stop at McDonald's once a month, okay, whatever it is, okay? Write it down. And then go back to that list day after day after day. Pray. I want this to be who I am. I want this to show the world the influence of Jesus in my life. And then, the first time you come up to the crossroads, you'll go like this. No, I'm starving. I'm going to McDonald's. No, nobody's going to see me. I'm going to roll through the stop sign. But the second time that you come up there, and the Spirit, remember that? Remember the Spirit guy in you, okay? The Spirit's going to say, fatty, turn this way, okay? No, he only says that to me. Okay, so not you. Okay, so but by the third or fourth or 100th time you come up to that crossroad, as you commit yourself to saying, Jesus, this is what I want to be. I want to be what the scriptures say that I am. Pretty soon, you won't even think about it. You will stop at every stop sign. You will stop at every red light. You will not go over the speed limit. You will not stop at McDonald's. You will not, whatever that is. And you will do it without pain. You will do it without struggle. You will do it naturally because your first principle is, I'm going to honor Jesus above everything else. Piece of cake, right? But you got to start. Make sure your heart is right with God, and then establish what their principles are. If you establish your principles and you commit to making them a part of your life, just like this psalm says right here, if you do that, and that crisis moment comes in your life, and it's going to come. It's going to come for all of us. Maybe 1 million of them are going to come. But if you're operating out of your first principles, the most important thing that you say forms who you are, well, then you're always and consistently going to make right decisions. And the advantage of you making right decisions is personally, it's going to alleviate a lot of the stress and the pain that comes into your life. So that's advantage number one. But advantage number two is maybe even more important. The world around you is going to notice. They are going to say, she is a woman of honor. He is a man of honor. Whatever he says goes. Whatever he says, I know it to be true, absolutely. If someone like that were to tell me, Warren, the sky is green, I would adjust all of my thinking to believe that the sky is green, because I know that that man or that woman lives by the principles that they say are important to them. And so somehow I have messed up thinking the sky is blue all these years. But the rest of the world will take note of that as well. The world that needs the hope that we have and the salvation that is in Jesus Christ, when we operate out of principles, when everything we do reflects that, what would Jesus do? And they see that in our lives over and over and over. No matter how many opportunities we have to do otherwise, they see that over and over and over. People around us will begin to elect to live their lives by what Jesus would do.